Throughout history, we can spot a pattern that keeps repeating itself. This pattern doesn't rely on military invasions or battlefield defeats. Instead, it's more like an internal illness, a kind of economic virus that infects every global power once it reaches the peak of its glory. Over the past 500 years, this virus has destroyed at least 3 major empires. And remarkably, the story unfolds with almost perfect accuracy each time. The Spanish Empire, which once held half of the world's gold and silver, declared bankruptcy within just 80 years. The British Empire, upon which the sun never set, collapsed in under 40 years. The Soviet Union, with its immense nuclear power, vanished in less than 3 years, just 900 days. 3 great powers, 3 total collapses, all following the same sequence. Today, the global scene suggests that the United States might be on the same path. But before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. And if you have any questions that keep you awake at night, put them in the comments and we will discuss them at 2 a.m. To understand this pattern, we need to go back in time a bit. The Roman Empire, which ruled the known world for over 500 years, had a complete economic system built on trust. The cornerstone of this system was its currency, the Roman denarius, introduced in 211 BCE. This silver coin weighed about 4.5 grams of pure silver. For centuries, it maintained its value because the Roman Empire preserved the purity of its currency. When you held a denarius, you knew you had real silver in your hand. But empires are expensive. With every expansion, costs grew. More soldiers, fortifications, roads, and administration. Eventually, expenses exceeded what Rome collected in taxes. So, like every failing empire, they devalued their currency. Emperor Nero started the trend in 60 CE, reducing the silver content of the denarius from 100% to 90%. That 10% difference became pure profit for the emperor, creating more coins from the same amount of silver. This is officially what we call inflation. The real disaster came later. By 211 CE, under Emperor Caracalla, the silver content of the denarius dropped to 50%. Fast forward to 265 CE during Emperor Gallienus's reign, and the denarius contained only 5% silver. Imagine, a coin that was once pure silver was now 95% cheap metal coated in a thin layer of silver. Its purchasing power collapsed. Farmers refused to sell food for worthless coins, and even the army demanded gold instead of silver. When the currency died, the empire collapsed alongside it. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire fell, not because the Germanic tribes were stronger, but because Rome couldn't pay its army. History repeated itself 1,200 years later, this time in Spain during its golden era in the 16th century. After the discovery of the Americas, Spain controlled the richest lands in the world. In 1545, they discovered Cerro Rico, in present-day Bolivia, the largest silver deposit ever found. For a century, this mountain produced nearly half of the world's silver. Ships filled with silver crossed the Atlantic, flooding Spain's treasury. The Spanish silver became the first true global currency, trusted from Europe to Asia. Spain became the richest and most powerful empire on earth. But Spain repeated Rome's mistake. When money floods the market, its value drops. By the early 1600s, prices skyrocketed. A silver coin that cost 1 unit in 1500 cost 10 by 1600. And Spain produced nothing itself. They had no industry, no innovation. Their wealth came from colonies, and they spent it on wars, palaces, and luxury goods imported from France and England. By the late 16th century, Spanish kings were drowning in debt. Philip II inherited massive debt, borrowed even more, and by 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy, the first in modern history. Over 40 years, Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times, despite controlling half of the world's silver. Fast forward 300 years, and we see Britain at its peak in 1922. The British Empire ruled a quarter of the world's population and a quarter of its land. The British pound was the global reserve currency, supporting over 60% of international trade. But Britain, like all empires, was built on debt. Bonds financed wars, colonies, and infrastructure. As long as the pound maintained its value, the system worked. But World War I changed everything. By 1919, Britain's national debt skyrocketed to over £7 billion, 10 times pre-war levels. They abandoned the gold standard, printing money instead, and the pound lost 25% of its value overnight in 1931. After World War II, the U.S. dollar replaced the pound as the world's reserve currency. Britain could no longer sustain its empire and gradually lost its colonies. The Soviet Union is the most recent example of this collapse pattern. After World War II, it emerged as a nuclear superpower, controlling Eastern Europe and rivaling the U.S. in every arena. But internally, the economy was dying. Overspending on military expansion, economic stagnation, failing technology, and food shortages created a fragile system. By the late 1980s, the ruble had lost all credibility. When oil prices fell and gold reserves dwindled, the system collapsed. In just 900 days, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. No war, no invasion, purely internal economic failure. Now, let's turn to America. The U.S. is following the same path, and in some ways, it's already far along. The first stage is excessive military expansion. America maintains over 750 bases in 80 countries, with its power projected across 150 nations. It defends Europe as part of NATO, protects Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, engages in the Middle East, and counters China and Russia, all at the same time. Its defense budget exceeds $850 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. Yet recruitment is declining, equipment is aging, and the military is stretched thin. Stage 2 involves devaluation of currency and debt accumulation. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, known as the Nixon shock. To fund the Vietnam War and domestic programs, the U.S. printed more dollars than it had gold. The dollar became a paper currency, backed only by government trust. Since 2000, the money supply has increased by over 400%, and the result is a 98% loss in the dollar's purchasing power. Stage 2 is complete. Stage 3 is debt spirals. The U.S. national debt now exceeds $36 trillion, around 120% of GDP. Interest alone surpasses $1 trillion annually, forcing the country to borrow just to pay interest. Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union all experienced similar debt spirals before their collapses. Stage 3 is now underway for the U.S. Stage 4 is the loss of productive capacity. America no longer manufactures essential goods. Its industrial base has shifted to China, Mexico, and Vietnam. Imports exceed exports by $800 billion annually. The U.S. relies almost entirely on imports and the dollar for payments. Once the world stops needing dollars, America will face a real crisis. Stage 5 is social decay. Historian John Glubb described it as the signs of societal collapse. Trust in government institutions is at historic lows. Homelessness is widespread. Drug overdoses kill hundreds of thousands annually. Fertility rates are declining, and political divisions are extreme. Society is fragmented into isolated bubbles, unable to agree on basic facts or morality. These are classic warning signs before the fall of an empire. Stage 6, the final and most sensitive stage, is the loss of reserve currency status. This is when global allies seek alternatives, trade shifts to other currencies, and the once dominant dollar loses its global demand. We are already witnessing this today. BRICS countries are developing alternative payment systems. Central banks are buying enormous quantities of gold, and Saudi Arabia has started accepting Chinese yuan for oil. Each ounce of gold purchased by central banks is another nail in the coffin of U.S. dollar dominance. After reviewing these 6 stages, the big question is, what comes next? History offers 3 possible outcomes. The first is controlled decline, like Britain experienced, high inflation, loss of currency prestige, but the state survives as a second-tier power. The second is chaotic collapse, like Rome. Currency loses all value, government loses control, and the empire disintegrates completely. The third is restructuring, a global financial reset, creating a new system dominated by rising powers like China and Russia. Unlike the past, the world today is highly interconnected. Any threat to a dominant power, such as China rising against the U.S., could trigger near-inevitable conflict. History suggests that the end is coming, not whether, but when. If you've made it this far, you're one of the dedicated viewers. Drop a like to let us know you reached the end, and leave your questions that keep you awake at night in the comments. We will discuss them at 2 a.m.